Welcome to Tangential Soup, a weekly podcast discussing life in Australia, technology, finance, food, fitness, and the like, hosted by myself, David Caddy, Melburnian, independent developer and tea enthusiast, as well as my good childhood friend, Alexander Carr, Sydney Sider, karate practitioner, and lover of adventure. So I thought we could start today off, Alex, talking about Google Stadia, Google's new foray into the world of gaming.
Yes. And it is pretty exciting news, I suppose. I mean, do you imagine that it will affect the way that you play games in the next 5 years?
Well, as you know, I'm not a massive gamer. We do play StarCraft on the odd occasion.
We do.
And it would actually be quite nice for something like that, because my little laptop somewhat struggles to play it. Like, it's fine, but it really cranks up the fans running. Like, it's on a warm day, it's really struggling. So I guess just as a brief recap of what this actually is, Google is proposing the idea of streaming games, which is not actually a new idea in and of itself, but this looks like the best execution thus far if their demos are any real indication of the final product. So they're going to be running instances of the game in their really powerful cloud, and then they will stream the video footage of that down to the gamer, and obviously the controls will be fed back up to the server and then run server side. So basically all the rendering for the game is done in Google's cloud, not on the end user's machine.
So when I hear you talk about it like that, my question is, does Google have, I mean, obviously Google has a lot of kind of, I don't know what exactly it is, processing power, I suppose, or rendering power, or whatever it is that makes the game playable. But that's quite a lot of stuff that it has to have sitting in the background.
Oh, a lot,
right?
yeah. I think they were talking about custom AMD, cores that sort of were designed for this type of application.
Right, okay.
Somewhat guided by Google, but then also using AMD's experience. And, just stacked together hundreds and hundreds of these things in a data center, all, optimally cooled and powered and have the best, internet connection to them that they possibly could have and all this sort of thing.
Right, okay. I mean, I think something that kind of struck me, and I'm not sure if Google have actually come out with any details on this, is what will be available to be streamed? Will there be custom kind of titles for this, or will they just be sticking any old game on this particular service?
Well, I did say they'd be working with anyone that had an interest of bringing their game to this platform. They've got sort of developer tools in place and, outreach people to try and get more games onto the service. They've also partnered with a few people. I think they mentioned Ubisoft. Not that I know which titles of theirs will come to this, but you'll get at least one. I know they had an early demo for this that used a little bit of Assassin's Creed, I think. So I would imagine that Assassin's Creed, whatever the newest Assassin's Creed is, will probably end up on the service. They did also announce that they've got Google Stadia, which is the name of this platform, but I think they're calling it Stadia Entertainment or something. They're actually creating their own in-house studio to create games and put it onto this platform.
Right, okay. Because, I mean, my first thought when I kind of heard about this was, obviously there's been a big rise in, I don't know what you're calling these, like massive multiplayer games? Yeah. MMOs? Massive multiplayer online games. So I guess things like Fortnite and everything, where you got 100 plus players, and everyone's kind of jumping in there. And I mean, like, I've kind of had issues playing on my console where there is not, like, there's a bit of lag, and then it just kind of absolutely ruins the game for you because you're kind of jumping around the place and your character's not moving as it should be, and then you just die without knowing how anything's happened. So I assume that it would be a complete game changer from that point of view, wouldn't it? Because potentially you could have any number of players in a certain game as long as it's been designed to support that number of players.
Yeah, it'll be able to scale a lot better. That's true. They were talking about, thousands of players potentially. I don't know what the game would actually end up being like in that scenario, but this infrastructure should be able to support such things. So I guess we'll at least see some early experiments with it.
Yes. It's always been my dream to play a kind of Age of Empires style game. I mean, obviously you probably want something a bit more sophisticated, with a medieval landscape and being able to scale that a lot larger and have, not just potentially up to 10 or however many players you can play against now, but hundreds or thousands of different players playing it. And the scale would be absolutely massive. And of course, it would be a difficult thing to design, of course, but that's what I want to see from this. That would be my main goal.
Yeah, that is good. There's a number of things that it opens up. Like, that's one of them. Another thing is being able to play these really resource-intensive games on really minimal hardware. Like, they were demoing it running on Chromecasts. So you don't have to buy a $400 console. You can just buy a $50 dongle and you're good to go.
I suppose as well, because one thing that I've noticed with what do you call it, where you have the goggles and you can kind of look all around you?
VR, virtual reality.
Yes, the VR systems it's cheap to buy the goggles and presumably the games that you can play it on, but the actual systems required to run it are quite expensive. Would it open up the field for those as well?
Interesting thought. Maybe, maybe not. My concern there would be, although they're talking about latency is pretty good with this, when you're moving your head and things, even the slightest bit of latency really kind of kills the experience for you. So I'm not sure whether they would be able to do that or not.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Interesting question, though. And maybe in the future, even if they can't get it now.
Because it's always seemed to me that is very much the future of gaming, that kind of style of being able to, a more kind of interactive style of gaming. So if they brought something like that
People keep saying it, but it doesn't really seem to have taken off hugely just yet.
But do you think that's because of restrictive technology? I mean, also as well as the other point where you have to have a room to play it in.
This is true. The barrier of entry is pretty high at the moment. So when that comes down, I guess will be the true test of whether it's going to be a gimmick or something that actually does take off.
Well, I mean, when I saw it, it didn't mean a whole lot to me apart from what we've kind of spoken about. Obviously, it'll have to, I guess, jump through quite a few hoops to actually be able to succeed in the market. Do you know when it's going to be available for public use?
They probably said at a time more specific, autumn or something, but they said this year it's coming, so I don't know when exactly. Unfortunately, not Australia first up.
Well, yes. We never get anything first, though.
Very rare.
Apart from the release of the Hulk movie with it's not really something to be prized.
That was an awful film.
That was a terrible film, yes.
Interesting, though, that you can have demos and things launch immediately, which is kind of cool. So say there's an ad for a game in your browser. Instead of just showing you some footage, you could literally launch straight into a demo and play it right there in the browser.
That is actually a good point. And I mean, I suppose it would make everything a lot more accessible. And I mean, something that really frustrates me using my Xbox is it always has to download updates, which I assume wouldn't be a consideration.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, no, because all the updates are server side.
Yeah. So, every time recently I've turned on my Xbox, it's either got a console update or it's got an update for the game. And it's gotten to the point where, or both. And it's gotten to the point where I really just don't bother to turn it on anymore. And I personally would like to see the end of consoles. I mean, I say that, I really enjoy my Switch, but I just find that the Xbox has just become a very commercial venture. There's a lot of micro purchases involved in it that I just very much don't like. I suppose that would probably transfer right onto Stadia, though, without any dramas.
That's true.
Which is unfortunate.
Apple just today announced a whole bunch of new streaming services, although details are a bit vague. But one of them they're calling Apple Arcade, which is this subscription service where you'll pay and you'll get access to a whole bunch of games, and those games will be playable all the way through without any sort of microtransactions or anything.
Oh.
And they'll all be exclusive, at least on mobile to Apple platforms, which is an interesting take.
But they're sort of arcade style games, are they? So designed to be played on your phone.
Yeah. Well, they're mobile first experiences, so they're not AAA titles necessarily, but it seems like they're partnering with a lot of really good sort of independent studios, which have had a lot of success for building quite interesting games on mobile platforms.
Mm-hmm.
So you'd probably say the best of mobile games, or probably the best of mobile games. I know there is sort of AAA games, and there's things like Candy Crush and that
Yes. Flappy Bird.
what's the game with you build the little fort and things?
Oh, Clash of Clans.
That's one. So all those type of ones,
Yes.
and they exist, and they are good games, but I wouldn't say their optimum version is on the phone necessarily. Well, if you're talking about Fortnite and PUBG and that, I suppose Clash of Clans is, but Clash of Clans wouldn't work without microtransactions, I don't think, really, because it is designed to be a very slow grind.
It is indeed, yes. And as someone who played Clash of Clans for probably about a year and a half, without any microtransactions, I can tell you that you can drop a year and a half of your life into that game and only still be at a level 9 village.
Yes, so it's interesting that Apple has kind of picked up on the slight discontent, I suppose, from gamers that most things have gone this way and have tried to make it more of a Netflix-style model, which may or may not succeed, but it's interesting.
Well, I think the problem with that always is there are some very popular titles that tend to attract a lot of the players, and then it's hard to kind of draw support away from those to support, I guess. Would these be more indie style games or kind of indie developers?
Yeah, most of them I think are indie style games. Do you, like sort of Alto's Adventure or that little puzzle game where you sort of rotate things in space?
Yes, I think that maybe for one or two of these games it'd be not easy to get support, but for a whole group of them it might be.
They said they're going to have 100 or so at launch.
I really know. Would you get that pack, David?
I mean, I don't really play games on the phone anyway. I barely play games at all, so probably not. But it's interesting.
Okay, out of curiosity.
But maybe if Apple had like a bundle, which we don't know now, but maybe they will by the end of the year, which includes their new video platform, Apple Music, this gaming thing, their news service, and say, iCloud storage or something. Depending on what the pricing is, maybe I would go for that because I would get enough out of it in overall.
Yeah.
But probably not on its own.
Okay, well, that's fair enough. I've probably been in the same boat as you, for different reasons, obviously, but I do sometimes play games on my phone, but I've stopped doing it for the most part, and I find that it's hard for a game on your mobile phone to deliver you something new consistently. Usually it's just fun at first, and then it starts to become a bit of a grind, and then you blink and you've lost a year and a half of your life, and you've got level 2 walls around your village, and it's all very upsetting.
One other thing I wanted to mention about this Stadia, it might mean the sort of resurgence of local multiplayer, even though it won't be local multiplayer, but it will seem like local multiplayer. Because Google teased that it would be very easy for developers to have like a split screen going on, because it's really two instances of the game running up in the cloud and just kind of rendered side by side in whatever you're viewing it on.
That's fantastic, actually, because that's something that I have really bemoaned the loss of, and that's why I like the Switch, because it's kind of a lot more accessible to same room play. But I suppose another point that you could make there, David, is you don't even need it to be same screen. If
That's
you've got
true. You could have two TVs or a laptop and a TV, or whatever,
or a tablet and a TV. So yes, that's actually a very exciting prospect. I did at one point consider trying to play Fortnite with Samantha, but I mean, it all just got a bit difficult, and her laptop wasn't very good, so we kind of gave up on the idea. But it would be a great way to play fun games together, and could very well spell the death of the console, I suppose.
Good.
The only way that the console is going to stay alive is through exclusive titles, I'd imagine.
Of which there are a fair few, but if Google starts getting a few exclusives of their own, and enough of them in, enough of the popular genres, then it may not matter for people.
Yeah.
Although I have heard rumors that both Microsoft and Sony are investigating this style of platform that they may introduce with the next, consoles. Maybe the next console will be more like a Chromecast, just a little dongle you plug into your TV.
Well, that would be very interesting, because you would assume that the console cost would then be very low, because
Yes.
obviously the hardware kind of needed to make it would be quite cheap. But then you would, I suppose, rely more on a subscriptions type service, wouldn't you?
You would, yeah.
Which is, I suppose, the direction that everyone seems to be going then, if Apple's gone down that road as well.
Yes, Apple's really trying to boost their services revenue, as they call it.
Yes, I had actually heard that they feel that their the iPhone market is quite saturated, which I would agree with. So I suppose they've got to try and move into other areas, don't they?
Yes, as they're not seemingly willing to sort of go more down market, they probably have reached almost as many people as they can.
Yes.
Until, I suppose, more developing nations come up, but who knows how long that will take. So yeah, they're really trying to get these subscription things off the ground. Well, they already have a lot of services revenue, but they want to really go hard on that. That's why they've invested $1 billion in creating TV shows.
Well, that's very interesting, actually. Because they're coming into quite a crowded marketplace already, because you've got Netflix, you've got Amazon.
Yep.
I mean, we have in
Hulu.
Australia Stan. Yes, Hulu, I think.
Disney's about to start up.
Yes, Disney's streaming service. So I don't know why they've decided to make that decision. It seems to me like they'd be better off going in another area that doesn't have quite as much competition. But I mean, what do I know, really? I guess that there are a lot smarter people than me who've made that decision.
I guess they feel like that they want to be in TV, or they've always been a bit of a content provider with their whole iTunes service, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's gone back forever. And they've recently switched their music to Apple Music. I say recently, it was probably a couple of years ago now, but that's a subscription model after previously only ever having, sort of you pay for music and then you own it type model.
Mm-hmm.
But they've always had shows and movies and things on iTunes as well. And that's probably been a pretty good area for them. But now, probably in the last few years, with the dominance of Netflix, they've seen revenue for that probably plummet, I would assume.
Yes.
And they've probably made the decision that we don't want to lose out on that market entirely. And therefore, what do you need to do in 2019 to be a relevant player? You need to have your own content, because if you don't, it seems like all the content providers have all of a sudden gone, well, we could just deliver it straight to our audience. We don't need any sort of middle people.
Yes. Which is fair enough.
Yeah.
So will they be providing this content service on their existing iOS? Will it? Because I know that Apple Music comes part of iOS, right? Or iTunes used to, at least.
Yes. So music is on all iPhones pre-installed. Interesting with the music that they also have an Android app.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, I suppose it makes sense, right?
Yes, although they haven't mentioned any sort of app for Android yet for this TV service. But they have announced a whole heap of partnerships with people. So it's going to be on Amazon's Fire Stick. It's going to be on all newish Samsung TVs and I think LG TVs.
Okay.
And also Roku.
Right, okay.
As well as the Apple TV box and all iOS devices and Mac devices. They didn't announce any sort of web service though, but they might have that as a fallback by the time it launches, because it's still only launching in fall, which is autumn, which is actually our spring.
Depending on where you are, yes. Well, I mean, they've certainly got a lot of users, so I'm sure that they're just trying to leverage off that. And I don't know. I have mixed feeling about Apple sometimes, but I'm sure that they seem to, when they release a product, it seems to be good quality. So hopefully this is the same.
Yes.
And maybe I'll subscribe to them at some point. Who knows?
Yeah, maybe, if there's some compelling content. The only one thing I do like about Apple is their privacy angle, which no one else seems to care about these days.
Oh, okay.
They also launched this new News Plus service, which Apple News has existed for a while in certain markets, which is just a free sort of aggregation of news content that partners would provide. But now they've got a subscription model for that too, to provide premium content. And they said they're going to recommend all these sort of things, your sort of standard recommendation algorithms that, YouTube and that would employ. But it's all going to be done locally on the device. So the device will sort of know what your tastes are over time and what you've been reading, but it will never send it back to Apple. They'll never know what you've been looking at.
Okay.
Which, imagine Google doing that. It wouldn't happen. Or Facebook.
Okay. Well, that's very interesting to me, actually, because I know that we've talked about privacy in the past, but in my mind, I just lump all the companies in together, and I don't really distinguish between them when it comes to privacy. I kind of feel like most of the information seems to be for sale.
Yes. Well, it's mostly true. It's Apple's kind of... Because Apple traditionally has never made money from selling data, like it's always been their huge margins on their hardware, they were always able to architect things in a way that was more privacy focused.
Mm-hmm.
And now with these scandals coming out from Facebook and things, they're actually leaning into it even harder as a point of differentiation.
Right, okay.
Which I think is probably smart.
It seems smart to me, yes.
They actually had an ad the other day for the iPhone, and it basically didn't show the iPhone at all. There was just sort of like little vignettes of people like wanting a small amount of privacy in a public space.
Okay, right.
And at the end, it's like, what happens on your iPhone stays on your iPhone.
Yes. That's good.
Yeah.
It's nice that one big company at least cares about privacy. All right, do you want to move on to...
New South Wales elections. I actually kind of forgot that this was happening.
Well,
I guess it doesn't affect me as greatly as you. I did hear about the lead up, but I didn't know it had already gone by.
Yes, it has. So I thought I'd talk about the New South Wales elections just because they happened and I live in New South Wales more than anything else.
Interesting that the Liberals got up again.
Yes, I was quite surprised by this, to be honest. Not that I had particularly been following the election in any real way. Just whenever it's kind of popped across my news feed, I'd take a look at what was happening. And I think that generally speaking, the lead up to the election, the consensus was that Labor were expected to put on a pretty good show, if not win. And I think 4 months out from the election, or three or 4 months out from the election, the Labor Party decided to change their leader, interestingly enough. Now, I think we've touched on Australian politics briefly in this show, but... a change of party leader is quite a common event in Australia. Now, obviously, if you're the opposition and you're not in power, to change your leader isn't such a big thing, because all it's really doing is changing the leader of the party itself. The leader of the party doesn't hold any real power except for over the party and the policy decisions that the party is putting forward. But obviously, the real power kind of sits with whichever party is in power. So it's not quite as big a deal as, say, changing your prime minister, which, as our listeners may or may not know, has happened quite a few times recently.
Just a couple.
Yeah, but before this change, I believe the Labor Party in New South Wales were ahead. And since the change, they've pretty much come back to exactly where things were from the previous election. So I don't think that they took any major seats that the Liberals were hoping, that the Labor Party were hoping to get. I think they took a few rural seats, but really there hasn't been a huge change in the political makeup of the New South Wales kind of area. Apart from, I think, the One Nation Party, which is a very right-wing conservative party in Australia, taking a few more seats, unfortunately.
Oh, that's no good. They're the worst party.
Yes, they are a bad party. I don't know if you've seen in the news recently, David, but they have there has been a leaked video of them
with the NRA.
Yes.
Yeah.
having basically a lobby meeting with the NRA. Now, this was before Australia introduced some new rules that basically state that political parties can't receive donations from overseas companies. Now, this wasn't actually put in place to stop anything like meetings with the NRA, although it should have been. I think it was more put in place to stop, I really believe it was mainly China, from having any potential influence over the Australian elections. Because obviously Australia is in that kind of Asia-Pacific region, which China is a very important part of and tries to exert a lot of influence over. But basically the video showed the One Nation Party meeting with the NRA and a lot of talk around receiving funding from the NRA. I think there was also a rather terrible part of the video where they talked about spinning any potential mass shootings and trying to turn the focus away from gun control if something like a mass shooting were to occur in Australia, which
Wow.
I think that we can probably all agree is a fairly despicable way of proceeding.
Absolutely. But what do you expect with Pauline Hanson at the head?
Well, I just find it very peculiar that, I mean, Pauline Hanson's, I guess, policies are primarily, in my mind, very conservative and also everything bad that comes with conservatives, so quite racist and xenophobic and, I guess, just very exclusionary as well. So just trying to, I guess, maintain what is essentially, I suppose, white power in Australia. But I just find it strange that goes hand in hand with gun control, because in my mind, if you can control things like, well, I mean, obviously Australia has quite tight gun control laws, but if you can control things like, gun use in Australia, then surely you have a better control over, I guess, the poorer percentage of the population than you otherwise would.
Yeah, I see what you mean.
Although, obviously that might not follow through. Obviously in America there's a lot of things going on with gun control and people killing each other all the time. But it's just a very sad thing. So the One Nation Party, I think, won 1 seat or 2 seats. And the Hunters, Fishers and Shooting Party in Australia hold 3 seats in New South Wales, which is the same amount of seats that the Australian Green Party hold, which I also thought was a bit strange. But obviously, I suppose New South Wales has a large percentage of its population that's rural, and they tend to support these more conservative parties that, I guess, might not represent the best. I shouldn't say the best. Might not represent the views that I hold, at least. I don't know when the Victorian elections are, but I would imagine that Victoria would have a fairly similar result to New South Wales.
Maybe. I just find it interesting because there's been so much sort of negative press around the infrastructure projects at the moment.
Yes.
in New South Wales. So I thought a change would be quite likely. Whereas at least in Vic, it seems like they're mostly doing okay. But it's also a Labor government, isn't it?
Yes, I think maybe it is. I'm not really sure. Yes, it is. I mean, obviously, so I live in the centre of Sydney, and something that kind of happens quite frequently is the main street, which is George Street, which kind of runs, I guess, through from the central station right up into Circular Quay, which is kind of up in the inner north area. So right through the centre. It's the main street in the CBD area of Sydney. And recently a project has been, well, I say recently, it was probably 2 or 3 years ago now. A project was announced to make to install a light rail service basically along that main strip and turn it into a car-free zone. I think taxis and buses might still be able to travel along it. I'm not entirely sure. But no kind of main traffic will travel along, and it'll just have this light rail service that will primarily be servicing people in this area. Now, when it was initially announced, it was to be completed in January 2019. I remember seeing the signs kind of hung up along the construction barriers, and obviously that hasn't happened. But what does happen is they're kind of closing off segments of George Street periodically to, I suppose, install whatever needs to be installed for this light rail service, and just kind of rip up all the stuff that needs to be ripped up and put in the tracks. And it's funny because the roads are consistently changing around here. One day you can access George Street, or you can kind of pass over George Street through this way. Another day you can only use this street and this street. And it's all very confusing. It's been going on for 2 years, and it doesn't look like it's very close to finished now. So I think the contractors that were originally employed to do the job have come under a lot of fire, and
aren't they like suing the government or something because they didn't make them aware of like power cables or something running underground?
There was a lawsuit. I'm not sure what it was for, and then the government has countersued because I don't know exactly what the reason was, but they've countersued the contracting company as well. So it's all a huge mess.
Yes,
but obviously it wasn't enough to change the government.
Apparently not.
So, yeah, there you go. Democracy for you, I suppose.
Thanks again for joining me, Alex.
Not a problem, David. Pleasure as always.
You can follow and get in touch with us on Twitter at Tangential Soup, and you can find this week's show notes for more information about today's topics at tsp.fm/207. If you enjoyed today's episode, please consider sharing it with anyone you think might also, and we'll talk to you again next week. Bye.
Ciao. You've got cooking down here.
We don't have to do that. I was just going to ask you whether you filmed anything.
I have not. No. I haven't even done my bolognese yet, though. So
Still time.
there is still time. Yeah. It is still on my list of things to do, but my list of things to do is a list of things that
Ever increasing.
yeah, it's not really getting done at the moment. So we'll see how we go. I did cook a stew last night, actually.
Oh, yeah.
I attempted to make a red wine and beef stew, but I didn't quite get it right. I think I put the red wine in far too early, so it just it's all turned a bit gloopy. It still tastes all right, but I wouldn't really say it has a red wine taste. It just more has a beef taste.
Still good though?
I would go as far as to say that it's okay. I wouldn't say it's good.
Room for improvement.
But that's a lot of my cooking. There is room for improvement, yeah. Once I get the recipe right, it'll all be okay.